Hello and welcome to this MindWorks Surrey webinar. My name is Amy and today we'll be learning a bit more about tics. This is part of a series of webinars that the MindWorks School-Based Needs team have put together on different mental health and emotional well-being topics, and you can find our full set on our website. We hope that these will provide some initial information and advice that you can then go on and discuss with your child and with school. Today we will be talking about tics and urges. We'll look at what different types of tics there are and what the typical pattern that they follow. We'll think of where do tics come from and what it's like to have tics, as well as how you might describe them to others. We'll think of common tic triggers and what helps to support people with tics. You'll also find out what to do if you have any questions or require further support. We'd like to start off by asking you to have a little think about what you want to get out of today. You might want to grab a piece of paper and make some notes, and it might be useful to have this for writing down some key information as we go along through the webinar. Hopefully, by the end of today, you'll have a basic understanding of tics, and we'll have had a think about some of the common tic triggers for your young person and how to support them. Okay, so let's start off with thinking about what tics are. Now, we can describe these as involuntary and sudden movements or sounds that can happen individually, so only one, or they can happen in bouts, so more than one in a row. Now, tics can occur anywhere in the body, but you can also get mental tics, and you might find that some young people will be repeating the same phrase over and over in their heads. So, tics can sometimes be preceded by a kind of sensory urge that we usually call premonitory urge, but not everyone will be aware of their urge, or they might not be aware of their urge for all of their tics. And we'll talk more about urges later down the line. So we can also differentiate tics between simple ones and complex ones. And we have another slide that will explain this in a bit more detail. Now, as I said, we can sometimes divide tics into different groups depending on whether they are motor tics or vocal tics and whether they are simple or complex. So, motor tics are tics that occur any part in your body. Whereas when we say a vocal tic, that is a tic that mainly occurs in your mouth or throat. So, we've also divided them into simple tics and complex tics. Now, a simple tic will be a tic that uses only one muscle or one muscle group, whereas a complex tic will use more than one muscle group. So if we think about, for example, if you blink, you are closing your eyelids, so you're only using your eyelids. That's the only muscle you're using. However, if you were to kind of scrunch your face and roll your eyes, then you would be using more than one muscle. So you'd be using your eyelids as well as the muscles around your kind of eyes and face to kind of scrunch and roll. So that would be a complex tic. Now, in terms of vocal tics, simple ones would be things like a cough or a squeak or like a small movement, whereas a complex vocal tic would be when we're putting more than one sound in a row to make something more complex, for example, like a word or a phrase. So we've just had a look at the different types of tics there are, but now let's have a think about what it's like to grow up having tics. So you've got a video from a famous YouTuber called Casper Lee, where he is talking to different young people with tics about their experiences of growing up with tics. So hopefully this will be able to provide a bit of insight into what it might be like for a person with tics. And just remember that each child will be different and they'll have their own unique experience. But you might find that there are some parts of this video or some things that the children experience that may resonate with your child's experience, and you might find that some may not. So it's quite a nice video for you to share with your child or your family or school or anyone else that you think it would be helpful. And you might want to make a note of any parts that stand out to you, so perhaps something that you can relate to, or some parts that you didn't know or that inspired you, and then take these conversations further with your child or anyone else you feel is appropriate.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Casper.
Hiya.
Thomas.
Yes.
Tom?
Yeah, I like being called Thomas.
Okay.
But you can call me whatever you like.
Do you watch
Yeah.
YouTube at all?
Yeah, a lot.
So I don't have to introduce myself. I do, right. Okay, my name's Casper. So you have Tourette's.
Yeah, I do have Tourette's.
I have Tourette's too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I was like 6 years old when I first kind of discovered I had them.
I was about 6, maybe 7.
When I found out, I was shocked. I had no idea what it was, and like everybody else, I just started swearing.
What was your first tic?
I was sitting down and I just popped out and I went,
For me, I was watching a movie with my sister and I went,
oh.
so it's like, it's strange, it's kind of similar.
I used to do a really loud like pig snort.
That was my first one.
Was it the first one?
Yeah.
I like scrunch my neck, I scrunch my nose, I scrunch my eyes. I kind of tense parts of my body as well.
I do one like that.
Like that?
And yeah, and I flip my head, and sometimes I do that or like that.
Still go on dates every now and then, but I was a dating man once upon a time. And then I'm like stretching my arm out. It looks like I'm trying to like hold the hand, but I'm like literally just trying to like...
Handful of popcorn
Yeah,
over the seat. Yeah.
Have you ever thrown food?
A sausage.
Put your hand under my leg.
Ah,
Imagine doing that a lot. How weird is
Yeah.
that?
that is weird.
Can you explain to people who obviously have no idea what it feels like, how it feels?
That's the hardest thing to do.
For me, it's like if you have an itch that you can't scratch for, and then it just gets worse and worse until you like scratch it.
Let me put this in perspective. Like, if you don't have Tourette's and you try and open your eyes and just kind of like not close them, it's kind of like that.
Has Tourette's ever stopped you from doing something you wanted to do because you were worried?
I can't concentrate so much, but it's getting better.
Is it?
Yeah.
I do have a question for you.
Perfect.
I have been doing some research on Tourette's, and apparently Tourette's gets worse as you like become a teenager and stuff.
I remember being like 10 and it was at its worst of Tourette's wise, but it got worse because of the situation I was in during puberty for me.
Oh, okay.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I was worried about what people thought of me more, whereas the Tourette's themselves didn't actually get any worse.
I'm quite good at suppressing my tics now. They were a lot worse when I was younger.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't notice, but occasionally in public, someone, like, I'll see someone staring at me.
Start of secondary school, people made fun of me. I just kind of tried blanking it out, taking myself to another group of friends who obviously understand it more.
Have you been, like, bullied in your past life?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I'm good at not listening to people.
Same.
What?
Oh my God.
I've never really had like bullying or anything because everyone had understood because I had explained it to everyone.
Yeah,
And bullying is mainly just things people don't understand.
exactly.
So because I've explained it to everyone, everyone's really nice to me about it.
It makes it so much easier to tick around people if they're understanding of it, if they're accepting of it. You don't feel like you need to hold anything back. You don't feel like you need to suppress anything. You live with it.
Exactly.
You move on.
Do you have any like advice for someone who has tics on how they could maybe like deal with other people's reacting to them? And
Well, what I do is just pretend that they're saying something else. Like, if someone says, like, you're stupid, I say, oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
And, like, try and pretend to say something else, and it works. Yeah.
I wish I had your mind.
You can live a normal life and live the life you want to live, even if you do have Tourette's. I think that's been a big driving point for me.
Some people look at me and say, like when I do a weird noise, they just give me a funny stare. But there's more to me than just Tourette's.
Do your friends at school understand what tics are?
Yeah.
And how do they treat you differently, or they?
No. Or just me.
So I hope you enjoyed the video of Cass Billy talking to different young people and their experience of growing up with tics and what tics they had. Now I'd like to invite you to have a think about when you first noticed your child's tics, and can you remember which was the first one you noticed? And this can be a tricky question because often tics might go unnoticed at the beginning, or we might think they're something else. So often people might think it's a cough if you have a sniffing tic, or maybe a blinking tic. People might think it's hay fever or something different. And you might have not realized what the first tic was initially. So this might be an interesting question to also ask your children and find out when they first noticed their tics. So we briefly mentioned urges at the beginning of the recording, and people with tics often experience a sensation or a build-up of energy before they tic. We call this a premonitory urge. So have a think about what you imagine a premonitory urge might feel like, and you might want to try not blinking for a minute to see what that's like. So feel free to pause the recording now and give that a go. So hopefully if you tried that, you started to feel some kind of sensations around your eyes, maybe like a pressure and this really big urge to blink. You might describe it as a tingling sensation or a tickling sensation. And, you know, sometimes it can be really hard to put these experiences into words. But bear in mind that premonitory urges are quite a unique experience, and they can feel quite different for each child. And they can also feel quite different depending on what tic it is. Not everyone is aware of them, so you might find that your child is aware of all of their urges, or maybe just some of them, or maybe none at all. We're going to watch a couple of videos now of some young people describing their own experience of a premonitory urge. And again, remember, this might be different for different people. But just have a think if maybe if you know whether your child has premonitory urges, and if you know that they do, have you ever spoken about what they feel like? And again, these videos might be ones you want to share with your child to see if there are any parts that might resonate with them, or any things that might be different for them. So let's have a watch, and as always, just remember to take down any notes of anything that might be interesting or salient or worth discussing further.
Tourette syndrome, and what people sometimes ask me is like, what does your tics feel like when you have them? And what I can say is that when I have them, I usually get the premonitory urge that we call it before I get it, and it's like this kind of surge of energy that kind of goes in and erupts into either a motor tic or a verbal tic usually. Sometimes it can be more tics at a time or after each other, but usually it's just one, either verbal tic or motor tic at a time. But it feels very spontaneous and very sudden, but it can be very hard to contain. But I've learned to contain it somewhat and kind of divert that energy into either my toes usually, so you'll sometimes see me tripping a bit more or being a bit more movie because but yeah, I can kind of divert the energy and kind of keep it in sometimes, but it's not always I can do that, and it costs me a lot of energy to do so, and it can also sometimes hurt me actually. So depending on where I am, I'll do it, but not always. I also have this trait where I do swear words, which can be very awkward, and I am not comfortable with them still, and it's difficult because it's hard to know what triggers them. Sometimes it's talking about it that can trigger it, so it's difficult when you feel alone with it and you can't talk much about it or see other people that have it, because it can kind of rub off on you if you do have this trait and Tourette syndrome. So
Tourette syndrome and tic disorders. So some people with Tourette's and tic disorders find that before a tic, we experience quite a strong sensation, and this sensation can feel different for everybody. For me personally, different tics have different sensations. So for my vocal tics, when I'm yelling random phrases and stuff in my coprolalia, it feels like a pressure in my chest. It sort of feels like someone's blowing up a balloon in my chest, and I kind of actually feel like I can't breathe. If I suppress, it does feel like I can't breathe, and that's why I never recommend suppression. And also for my full body tics, it sort of feels like something's shooting up my spine. And then I did have tics where I felt like something was stuck to my skin, like it didn't actually feel sticky, but it just felt like something was clumping around my skin. That sounds very strange, but these sensations were quite strange, and they can pretty much feel different for everybody. So I think one of the worst urges actually was in my throat, because I had a throat tic and I just felt like something was stuck in my throat. It's also interesting as well that the pronunciation urges aren't necessarily localized, so they don't occur in the part of the body where the tic is. For example, I had a middle finger tic, but the urge was actually in my stomach, so I had a sensation in my stomach and then did the middle finger tic. So the urge isn't technically always in the part of the body that the tic occurs. And not everyone with Tourette's actually experiences premonitory urges. Quite a lot of people do, but not everyone does. I have a friend with Tourette's who, he has quite severe Tourette's, however he just isn't aware of the urges, and not everyone is aware of it. But for me personally, I think I've actually been aware of my urges pretty much my whole life, because my Tourette's didn't explode till I was 8 years old, but I did have mild tics pretty much my whole life. And I remember when I was 4 years old, I had a spitting tic, and I always felt like there was this weird thing in my mouth, and that was pretty much, I think, my first time experiencing the premonitory urge. And yeah, some people also have some tics where they're aware of the urge and some tics where they don't have the urge.
So we've just had a couple of different young people describing what their urges feel like for them. And remember, urges are a unique experience. So some of these descriptions might be similar to what your child's experiences, but some of them might not. But it's all about learning more about your child's experience and what it feels like for them. And again, remember, not everyone will be aware of their urge. So if your child isn't aware of their urge, or they're aware of only some of their urges, that's absolutely fine and normal. But by knowing more about our tics and learning more about our urges, we can start to develop more awareness of our tics and our urges, and this is the first step towards learning to suppress them. So I hope that was useful for you to understand a bit more about the experience. So one of the questions that we get asked quite frequently is, how do I know if I've got tics or Tourette's, and like, what's the difference? So we thought it'd be quite helpful to go through some of the language and vocabulary that's used when people talk about tics and Tourette's, so that you can understand the differences. However, Mindwork Surrey has adopted a needs-led approach, which means that children and young people that live in Surrey can access support from Mindworks without a need for a diagnosis. This means that we wouldn't routinely diagnose someone with Tourette's or tics for them to access support. Now, if you or the young person has had tics for less than a year, some people call this transient tics or probable tic disorder. If you've had a vocal or a motor tic, so not both, just one or the other, and you've had that for more than a year, then people might call this a chronic tic. However, if you've had at least one vocal and a few motor tics, and you've had them for longer than a year, and you haven't had any sort of long gaps of 3 months or more, then this would be referred to as Tourette's. So we know that tics don't occur in a set way and that they can change over time, and the pattern can be slightly different for each person. However, most people will find that their tics tend to go up and down, so through phases, where they might start to become more bothersome and then they might calm down, and then they might get more bothersome again and then calm down. So don't worry if you're in a particularly bothersome moment, because you know they will calm down. They will calm down. So, most young people find that, their tics change over time. You might get new tics appearing and then old ones disappearing, and then they might come back again. They can fluctuate over time and in their intensity. And as you can see in this diagram, for a lot of young people, we can see there's a bit of a peak at the age of around 11, 12, 13 years. And this is usually due to hormonal changes in their body due to puberty, but also environmental changes such as transition to secondary school and things like that. And because we know that stress and changes and environmental stresses can make our tics worse, then this is why we can often see this peak during adolescence. But what we also see is that over the years, most people have grown out of most, if not all, of their tics by the time they reach adulthood. So what we see is for 1/3 of people, their tics will have gone away completely. For another third, they will be significantly better by the time they're an adult. And for the remaining third, they'll still have tics, but they will have probably learned pretty good ways of managing them. So, where do tics come from? Well, there's still a lot of research being carried out into tics, so we can learn more about them. But we do know that there's usually a genetic component to them. This means that they run in your family's genes. You might be able to find someone in your family or extended family that either has tics or OCD, but this doesn't mean that everyone in your family will have it. We also know that tics are often caused by the way our brain is wired, and we'll have a closer look at this now on the next slide. Now, we know tics come from the brain, but exactly where from the brain do they come from? Well, this is not as simple as it might seem, as more than one part of the brain is involved. But if you look at this purple area, labeled motor cortex, that's the part of the brain that's in charge of creating movements so that we can walk or talk or even sing. And sometimes a little bit of extra work here means that some extra movements might be created. This motor bit is connected to the blue bit on the diagram, which is the front part of our brain. And sometimes there's a little bit of less work here. This frontal part of our brain can help stop some of these movements. And as there is a bit of less activity in this area, and sometimes a bit of extra activity in the purple area, this means that the body can let out some of the extra movements as a tic. So we've just spoken a bit about tics and what some of the research has found out about them. And that 80% of young people will grow out of their tics and only have a few tics as an adult. But how common are tics? So we know that 1 in 8 school-age children have tics and that they are more common than you think. And we're going to have a look a bit more about this now. So we've just had a look at how common tics are, and we've seen that 1 in 8 school-age children will have tics. But there's also a number of well-known or famous people that have spoken out about having tics or Tourette's, and that just goes to show how common they are. So have a little look and see if there's anyone on here that you recognise. And I'll quickly name them. So we've got Billie Eilish in the middle. She's an American singer, and she's recently spoken about, well, a couple of years ago, spoken about having Tourette's to her fans. And we'll watch a video on the next slide of her talking about her experience and how she manages her tics. We've got Casper Lee on the left, which is a famous YouTuber that was presenting one of the videos that we saw previously. We've got some football players like Tim Howard and David Beckham. We've got actor and comedian Seth Rogen, and we've got Louis Capaldi here on the left as well. And then we've also got Mozart, which is thought to also have had Tourette's. So from this slide, you can see there's lots of people in the public eye that also have tics, and they've been able to lead meaningful lives and have really successful careers and relationships. So we can see that there's people with tics everywhere in all areas. Now, we'd like to ask you to think a bit about how you would describe tics to others, because we know that raising awareness about tics can help young people navigate situations more comfortably, and helping others understand what tics are can help them also support the young person. And sometimes this just means ignoring the tics instead of responding to them. So we thought it would be helpful for you to grab a piece of paper and make some notes, and think about how you would explain tics to other people. It might be to friends and family, it might be to teachers, or just, any other random person. And the way you will describe tics might be a bit different depending on who you're talking to. So sometimes it's really good to just have a bit of a plan of what you might say, so that way you might feel more prepared for those situations if anyone ever asks, or if you feel you need to describe it. And on this slide, we've got an example of something that you might say. So you might explain, that your child has tics, and that this means that they might be making sort of sudden noises, but actually they can't help that. And you might want to explain that if they ignore them, that's the more helpful thing, because the more attention we pay to them, then the more he's likely to tic. And you might also want to signpost them to where they can find more information if they'd like to. And we put Tourette's Action in because that's a great website for people to learn more about tics and Tourette's. So feel free to pause the recording and take a few minutes just to think about how you would describe tics to different people. And also, young people have often reported that it's really helpful for them to have their own card in their pocket, for example, or have prepared this beforehand, and have that card that they can use to describe what their tics are to other people. So this is an activity that you might want to try with your child at home, just having a conversation about how they would describe tics if a friend asks, what are you doing? Or if a teacher asked them, or if they felt that they wanted to let a teacher know before starting a class, or anything like that. So yeah, take a few moments to think about, what you would say in each different type of situation, and then have a go at doing the same with your child. So hopefully you've written down some ideas of how you might explain tics to others, and you might be thinking, well, why is it important to do this? Now, parents, teachers, and peers have a key role in helping a child to feel comfortable about ticking, and in helping them view their tics as something normal. So many children worry about how others might perceive them, and as we'll go on to discuss, feelings of anxiety and worry can actually make our tics worse. So what we want to do is stay away from negative attention, such as telling a child off. As you can see on this slide, the lady saying, why do you do that? Or the teacher saying, can you stop? All of these, or someone actually laughing at the young person, all of these things are strongly discouraged because that brings negative attention to tics. However, positive attention should also be minimized because unconsciously we might be rewarding tics and making them more likely to happen. So what we know is that ignoring tics is boring for them. So that's what we're aiming for. So we want to be talking about tics positively and ignoring them as much as possible when they occur. And all of these things, it's very helpful to discuss with school and make sure that they are aware of it, because the more comfortable we can make the environment for the young person, the more supportive it's going to be for their tics, as we know that tics are related to our emotions and to strong emotions, or especially stress. It might also be helpful to have a chat with your child and think about like how they might describe tics to others, so that if they're ever put in a situation where someone might ask them, you know, what they're doing or anything like that, they have a prepared response and they know what they can say if that happens, so that they're not caught off guard. So we've just seen some examples of people who have tics who have become famous and have been very successful in life, but there are many more, so feel free to research who else has tics and find out if there's anyone else you know that might have tics. And now we've got a video of Billie Eilish sharing her experience of tics. And it's interesting to hear how she, after sharing her experience, she found out that some of her friends also had tics. And it's a great example of someone who has been successful and has developed ways of managing their tics over time. So again, be mindful of if there's anything in this video that strikes you or that you find particularly useful and want to write down, and then later maybe share with anyone else.
And brave that you didn't intend to speak about, but that you have Tourette syndrome and that it comes out at certain times. But I think that's amazing that you spoke about it, because you kind of take away the, you know, scariness of it.
It's something I've lived with my whole life, and everybody knows, like everybody in my family, all my friends, all the people that are closest to me know I have it, and it's not anything different, you know? And I just never said anything because I didn't want that to define who I was. I didn't want it to be like the artist with Tourette's, Billie Eilish is on Ellen.
Yeah.
I have ways of kind of making them go away. So if I'm on if it's like an on-camera interview or whatever.
That's what this is.
Yes, it is. But normally, if it's like a pre-taped thing, they cut out the questions.
Right.
And that's when I let them out. But then there was this one interview where they didn't tell me they weren't gonna cut the questions out. So I'm sitting there answering the questions like, and then they start asking me a question and I'm like, and then everyone's like, that's so funny. And they made a whole, there was tons of compilations like, this is so funny that Billie did this facial expression, when really it's just a bunch of tics.
Right. Well, no, I think like I said, I think it's a good thing that you because I'm sure a lot of people have that, and it's look at where you are and look at what you know have accomplished, and you haven't let that even make you feel like there's something wrong with it, because it's not. It's just part of who you are.
I think I also really learned that a lot of my fans have it.
Yeah.
Which made me feel kind of more at home with saying it, because I remember and also I felt like there was a connection there. I felt like when I said that, there were kids that were posting and being like, oh my God, I've always had this.
Yeah.
Like, now she has it and she's who I can look up to with it. But
yeah. No, I think it's, like I said, I think a lot of people watching now that, maybe didn't hear you say it before will be like, well, I have it too, and that's great.
Now, to quickly recap some of the information, we've got a little quiz on what makes tics worse. Have a go at answering the questions. I will give you a couple of seconds, but please feel free to pause the recording and take more time if you need to. So question 1. Does suppressing tics make them worse? Yes or no? What do you think? And the answer is no. So suppressing tics does not make them worse. And we know from research that actually suppressing tics can be helpful. And a lot of the treatment available for tics uses suppression. Question 2. Does talking about tics make them worse? What do you think? Yes or no? Yes. So talking about tics does make them worse. And we know that this is a very common trigger for young people. And the more attention we pay to our tics and the more we talk about them, the more likely we are to experience them. Question 3. Does ignoring tics make them worse? Yes or no? What do you think? No. So actually, ignoring is boring for tics, and this can be a really helpful strategy to use. So definitely ignoring tics does not make them worse. It is helpful. Question 4. Do stressful situations make tics worse? Yes or no? Yes. So we know that stressful situations definitely tend to make tics worse, and the more anxious we feel, the more we tend to worry about our tics and the more we tend to tic. Question 5. Do big emotions make tics worse? Yes or no? Yes. So we know that tics are often triggered by big emotions, and they can be positive emotions or negative emotions. So it can be stress and anxiety, but it can also be happiness and being excited. Question 6. Do certain people, places, smells make tics worse? Yes or no? And our final answer is yes. So we know that tics are often triggered by specific places or specific smells or people, and these can be different for each young person. So hopefully this has been a useful recap of some of the triggers for tics, and hopefully you knew some of the answers, but we may have surprised you with some of the ones that you didn't know. But hopefully that is helpful for you to recap. The next thing we're going to be talking about now are tic triggers. So each person's tic triggers are going to be different, so you need to figure out what are the tic triggers for your child. But we have included some examples of common tic triggers that tend to trigger tics for most young people. So we've got different types of big emotions, and this doesn't have to be only anxiety or anger. It can be positive emotions like happiness and excitement. So big emotions are very frequently a trigger for tics. We've also got, leading on from that, stress. So different stressful situations like exams, or different maybe changes and things that might be going on for you. We've got people telling you to stop ticking or people telling you off for ticking. That is a very common tic trigger, so make sure that everyone that is supporting your child is aware that they have tics so that they're not telling them off for ticking or asking them to stop ticking. Similar to that, we've got focusing on your tics. So this works in the same way. The more focus you put on tics, the more you're going to tic. We also have the opposite. So being somewhere that is very quiet, like an assembly or a library, that absence of noise can sometimes also trigger our tics. As I said, triggers are very specific to each person, so you're going to want to think about what things trigger your child. But sometimes there will be specific people or specific places or smells or sounds that can trigger your tics. And this might be because they are linked to another type of emotion. So, it's a scary place or a scary person, and that's why they trigger our tics. Or it might be an exciting place or any other kind of emotion for you. We also have on here changes to your routine. So we know that often children will struggle when they come up to a half term or the end of term, and that change from going to school to being on holiday, but also that change from being on holiday and returning to school. So changes to your routine, or maybe substitute teachers, or someone being away. All these things can sometimes also be a trigger for tics. And then very importantly, last two, but definitely not least, we have sleep and hunger. Now, these are very, very common triggers for tics, and often they go unnoticed because we don't realize that they have such a big impact. So making sure you get a good night's sleep and have a good bedtime routine is really, really helpful, but also making sure that you're not hungry. And what you might do is try and make sure that you have some snacks packed with you if you're ever going anywhere, and that you're making sure that you're not feeling hungry, or that if you are feeling hungry, that you're snacking to help keep those sensations at bay. Now, we want to figure out what our child's tic triggers are, because once you know what the triggers are, you can often put in place some solutions. So, for example, if I'm going on a trip or an activity that's a bit long and I know that I might be likely to feel a bit hungry, I can take some snacks with me. Or if I know that I'm worried because I've got some exams coming up, then maybe I can kind of plan ahead and make a bit of a plan of when and how and who I'm going to study with, and that might take away some of the pressure. So just thinking ahead and being aware of those triggers can help us put in place some buffers and some plans and some strategies. Maybe you just need to do a bit of relaxation before you do that stressful thing, or focus on doing some breathing exercises to help you feel a bit calmer, so that your emotions aren't as big and you can kind of keep those tics in check. So we've just had a think about what triggers your child's tics and what might make them worse. But now we're going to move on to thinking about what might help them with their tics. And it's really important to remember that each person is different. So you really need to find what works for your child. And different things might work on different days, and, things might change over time. So one thing might be really helpful at one time, but then they might just grow out of it and prefer a different thing. So remember, this is very personal and this can change over time. So you might need to review these as you go along. But overall, we've got some of the most common strategies that we know help young people with tics. And these include, first of all, relaxation and getting enough sleep. So we know that when people are tired, they're more irritable and more likely to feel stronger emotions and more likely to tic. So making sure that you've got a good bedtime routine and that your child is getting enough sleep is really important, but also making sure that they're taking time to relax and to unwind, especially after a difficult day or a long day at school. So thinking about what ways help them to relax, and that might be through an exercise like breathing or a grounding exercise or some guided meditation, but it might just be playing some relaxing music and having some nice lighting. It might be a bath that helps them. So really just have a think about what helps your child feel calm. When do you see them feeling relaxed and peaceful? And maybe make a note of that now. So apart from getting enough rest, it's really important that they also figure out what things that they enjoy doing, what things are so absorbing that they're just so absorbed by it that they're not ticking. And these might provide like a little moment of release from those tics when they're really bothersome. So think about things like, do they like art or dancing or any sports or any music or anything that they're really interested in, that when they're doing that, they're just fully focused. And leading on from that, so we know sports are often a very good way to manage tics, but not only traditional sports like football or basketball, but also any other type of physical exercise. And that might be trampolining or heavy lifting or running or skipping or dancing or any other form of physical movement can sometimes be a really helpful strategy. We've also got distracting. So any type of distraction, as we know that the more we focus on tics, for example, the more we trigger them, or the more we focus on any anxious thoughts or any thoughts that provoke any kind of big emotions, that can trigger our tics. So often just distracting our minds from those worrying thoughts or whatever it is that we're focused on can be really helpful. So think about any games that you might play with your child. Do you play any kind of games in the car? Are there any kind of funny YouTube videos that they might enjoy watching? Or maybe just chatting to a friend or someone else about a completely different topic, or a topic that they really enjoy talking about. So if you know they're really into Pokemon, why not bring up Pokemon to distract them from whatever is on their mind? Now, the next strategy we have here is focusing on our senses. And this can be like literally focusing on something that you can see. So often there are like really cool fidget toys that might have glitter in them, or snow globes. It might be something that smells really nice, like a candle or a cream, so you're focusing on that sense of smell. Sometimes there might be something you like the sound, your child likes the sound of, so like a little chime or some kind of toy or fidget that they like the sound of, and they can focus on that. So what you might want to do is create like a little sensory box or sensory bag. If you know, for example, their tics are quite strong in the car, you might have a little sensory bag that you carry around in your car for when they're there, that they can focus on that, and have, you know, things that are distracting, things that are engaging, things that appeal to your senses. And we've also put in here a little grounding technique called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'll run through this really quickly. So 5 stands for 5 things that you can see, and what you do here is try and focus your attention on 5 things that you can see. So look around you, and that might be a chair, a table, a pen, the laptop, and some headphones. So 5 things that you can see. Then you move on to 4 things that you can feel or maybe touch. So you might feel the chair, you might feel your clothes, you might feel your feet inside your shoes, or you might feel the surface of the table. And try and really focus on your senses. How does it feel? Is it rough? Is it smooth? Is it cold? And then you can move on to 3 things that you can hear. So take a moment to really closely listen and try and see if you can hear 3 different sounds. And you might want to pause the recording to do this and have a go. Then number 2 stands for 2 things that you can smell. And sometimes you might be able to smell something in the environment, but sometimes you might have to smell your clothes or your hair, or something around you. And last but not least, we've got one that can be one thing that you can taste, or some people prefer to swap this for one deep breath. So have a go at trying the strategy with your kids. Often it can be quite fun, and if you notice while you do it, you're not really focusing on any anxious thoughts or any other things that might be going through your mind. So this is a great strategy also for distraction. Now lastly on here we've got working with school, and it's really important to make sure that you have good communication with school and that they understand how to support your child, so that they're able to make them have a more comfortable environment and experience of school. And as we've seen, talking about tics with others can help us avoid uncomfortable situations coming up, and really help staff understand how to best meet the needs of your child. And remember, these can change over time. We know that tics wax and wane, and they're also affected by environmental stresses. So make sure you're keeping good communication and updating school on any changes in your child's needs, or any things that might be working or particularly tricky at the moment. Other things you might want to consider discussing with school is thinking about whether your child ever needs a break in the classroom, and if they do, how will they do that, and are teachers aware that they might need that, and do they need any kind of signal or card for them to be able to do that. Also, maybe thinking about where they sit in the classroom, in terms of location, if they do need to go out, that it's quite easy for them to exit and they're not having to kind of walk past other people and kind of disrupt the flow of the class. Also thinking about who they sit next to. Are they in a location where they feel comfortable? So do they sit next to someone who they feel comfortable ticking next to? And also thinking about, depending on their age, whether they might need any adaptations for exam conditions. But also if there are any situations or people or environment that are specific triggers for them, and whether there's anything that we can do to support them there in school. We hope you found the information that we've covered today useful, and that you've gone away with some ideas of things that you would like to try with your child. Also, maybe some things that you want to think about changing or doing differently, and hopefully you've learned some things about tics that you didn't know before, and feel more comfortable or able to discuss these with other people. On the next slide, you'll be able to find a 2-minute questionnaire for you to leave feedback. This is really helpful for us to know what you found useful and also what we can improve on. You'll also be able to find some links to books and support groups, as well as websites that have lots of useful information and resources. So please take a moment to have a look at those and investigate further and see what you can find. We've also included a slide on other mental health services that are available to you, so take a moment to familiarize yourself with them, and make sure you keep those contact numbers to hand in case you ever need them. So after today, hopefully you'll be more aware of what your child's triggers are and what you can do to help them. So try out some of the strategies, and if despite that you find that your child is still struggling with their tics, please do contact your GP or your mental health lead in school to discuss further support. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you found the information covered today useful.